She never meant to text a Mafia boss, but one wrong number sent him her baby's ultrasound, and the next day, he sent a helicopter, not flowers, not a message, a helicopter. When she stepped inside, she didn't know. This mistake would pull her into a world of danger, desire, and a love she was never supposed to find. Let's dive in. The night was painted in rain, droplets streaming down Ilara's small apartment window like restless tears from the heavens, tracing crooked paths against the cold glass. The city outside drowned in shadows, neon lights flickering across puddles that mirrored broken dreams. Inside, Ilara sat at the edge of her narrow bed, wrapped in a blanket that did little to chase away the chill of loneliness. Her trembling fingers held her phone as she looked once more at the ultrasound photo glowing faintly on the screen. A small blur of life, her baby, her only piece of hope in a world that had given her so little warmth. Her breath came out uneven, a fragile blend of exhaustion and quiet fear. Bills lay scattered across the table, unopened, and the faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the silence. Her heart ached with longing for stability, for safety, for someone to simply care. Blinking back tears, she typed the message meant for her doctor. The ultrasound came out clear. Can you confirm everything's fine? That tiny heartbeat meant everything to her. She smiled faintly through the fatigue and pressed send before exhaustion could blur her thoughts any further. The rain deepened outside, the rhythmic tapping against the window sounding almost like a lullaby. She set her phone aside, closed her eyes, and whispered softly to the little life inside her belly. We're going to be okay, I promise. But fate, cruel and poetic, often hides behind the smallest mistakes. Minutes later, her phone buzzed once sharply, pulling her back from her drifting thoughts. Expecting a reply from her doctor, perhaps reassurance, a reminder for her next appointment, she picked it up, only for her heart to freeze mid-beat. The name flashing across the screen wasn't her doctor's. It wasn't even familiar. It read, Lorenzo De Rossi. The name itself carried the weight of the underworld, the shadow that ruled the city's heart. Even she, who avoided gossip and fear, had heard it whispered in low tones across markets, coffee shops, and late-night conversations. He was the name people didn't say too loudly, the Mafia boss who ran the city's veins. Her thumb trembled as she opened the message, and her world tilted as her eyes fell upon the words, "Who's the father?" They were blunt, cold, and demanding, yet they burned through her veins like fire. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. Her thoughts spun in disbelief, her pulse echoing like war drums inside her chest. How could this happen? How could one wrong number lead her to him? Of all people? Her lips parted, forming silent words of apology. Her hands shook as she reread the message, hoping she had imagined it, but the name stayed, sharp and undeniable, Lorenzo De Rossi. The tiny apartment that had always felt too small now seemed suffocating. She typed frantically, desperate to fix the mistake. I'm so sorry, this message wasn't meant for you. But before she could press send, another notification appeared. We need to talk, tomorrow. Her phone slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. She stared at it, her vision blurring with tears, her heart racing wild and uneven. She stumbled to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked streets below as if the night itself could give her an answer. This can't be real, she whispered, her voice cracking. He can't mean that. But deep within her, a quiet dread began to bloom. The kind that sinks into your gut and refuses to leave. Why would a man like him care about a stranger's message? Why hadn't he ignored it like anyone else would? The city lights flickered like nervous eyes in the rain, and she could almost feel them whisper, run, hide, too late. She sank onto the couch, pressing her trembling palms against her knees, trying to calm the shaking that had taken over her body. Her thoughts collided like thunderclouds. What if he thought she was lying? What if he believed she'd done this on purpose? She'd heard stories about him, how Lorenzo De Rossi handled betrayal, how he never let an offense go unanswered. But this wasn't betrayal, it was a simple mistake. Still, to a man who controlled the darkest corners of the city, even an accident could be dangerous. Her fingers brushed the edge of the ultrasound photo beside her, a fragile reminder of what mattered most. She had no choice but to protect her child, yet something in her gut whispered that her quiet life was already gone. She tried calling her doctor to explain, but her hands were trembling so violently she dropped the phone twice. The line buzzed and disconnected. The air thickened, pressing down on her. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second hammering against her nerves. She could almost hear his voice in her head, deep, commanding, the kind that didn't ask, only demanded. Somewhere out there, he had already seen that ultrasound. Maybe he was wondering who she was. Maybe his men were already tracing her number. The thought made her heart stumble. She wanted to believe he would forget, laugh it off, move on, but power never forgets, and curiosity, in the wrong hands, can destroy. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, revealing her reflection in the window, pale, frightened, yet carrying a strange spark of realization. Her life had just shifted. "It was just a text," she whispered. "Just a mistake." But even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. She picked up the phone again, staring at his name glowing on the screen. She wanted to delete it, block it, pretend it never happened. Ned. But another part of her, the one that had grown tired of fear, hesitated. What if fate was speaking in its own strange language? What if there was meaning hidden in this madness? Then another vibration in her hand, a new message. Her breath caught. Slowly, she opened it. "You shouldn't ignore me." That was all it said. No threat, no question. Just a statement heavy with certainty. It was worse than any warning could have been. She could almost imagine his eyes, cold and unreadable, watching her from afar. Her pulse roared in her ears, and she backed away from the phone as if the words themselves could reach out and grab her. The rain hammered harder against the window, as though urging her to listen. She turned off her phone and pressed it against her chest, whispering a desperate prayer. But prayers rarely reach men who own the night. Outside, the storm finally began to calm, but the silence that followed was heavier, more dangerous. Somewhere in the dark skyline, behind guarded walls and flickering lights, a man stared at the same message thread, his mind already turning with curiosity, with interest, with something darker. Lorenzo de Rossi wasn't a man who believed in accidents. Every move he made was precise, deliberate. And now, this. A stranger, a message, an ultrasound. A symbol of life sent straight into his world of death. To him, it felt almost like fate had whispered a challenge. And Lorenzo de Rossi never ignored fate. Back in her small apartment, Ilara lay awake, her phone beside her pillow, her eyes wide in the dim glow of streetlights leaking through the curtains. Every creak of the old building made her flinch. Every car that passed below felt like a prelude to something coming for her. She wanted to believe that by morning it would all disappear, that it was nothing but a cruel trick of exhaustion and coincidence. But deep inside, she knew the truth. Some mistakes don't fade. They rewrite destinies. She turned onto her side, holding her stomach protectively, and whispered, "I'll keep you safe, no matter what." But just as her eyes began to close, the phone buzzed one last time. Her trembling hand reached for it, her heartbeat filling the silence. A single new message glowed on the screen. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m., don't make me come to you." And in that moment, Ilara realized that the storm outside had found its way inside her life, and it would not end with the rain. The night had not been kind to Ilara. Sleep never truly came, only the slow torment of half-dreams filled with shadows and unanswered questions. Every time she closed her eyes, the name Lorenzo de Rossi echoed through her thoughts like a curse. She had heard of him in whispers, in stories that belonged to another world entirely, a world where mercy was rare and power ruled everything. And now that world had reached into hers, wrapping its cold fingers around her trembling heart. When morning broke, the pale light filtered weakly through her thin curtains, painting the room in shades of quiet despair. Her phone lay on the nightstand, silent yet menacing, as if it held a heartbeat of its own. Ilara stared at it, afraid to touch it, afraid of what another message might bring. She told herself it had to be a prank, some cruel joke, but deep down she knew. That name wasn't one people played with. That name was real. Then, without warning, the phone rang. The shrill sound tore through the stillness, and her breath hitched sharply. For a moment she froze, every muscle locked, her pulse roaring in her ears. Then, as if pulled by something she couldn't explain, her trembling fingers reached for it. She didn't recognize the number, but she already knew who it was. Elara. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It rolled through the speaker like velvet over steel, deep, deliberate, carrying the kind of authority that made her forget how to breathe. "You sent me something personal." The silence that followed was heavy, charged, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Her mind scrambled for words, her throat painfully dry. It it was a mistake," she stammered, barely above a whisper. There was a soft chuckle on the other end, low and dangerous, the kind that made goosebumps rise on her arms. "Nothing is ever a mistake with me," he murmured. The way he said it, it wasn't a threat. It was a truth. Cold, final, unarguable. Elara gripped the edge of her blanket, trying to steady her shaking hands. "I didn't mean to bother you, Mr. De Rossi. Please just delete it." But Lorenzo didn't answer right away. Instead, she heard something in the background, a faint hum of engines, the sound of wind against metal, voices murmuring in the distance. Wherever he was, it wasn't anywhere ordinary. Then his voice returned, softer now, yet filled with the weight of command. "You're alone." It wasn't a question. He already knew. Somehow, he always seemed to know. Her heart pounded faster. "That's none of your business," she managed to whisper, though her voice cracked halfway through. "Everything about you became my business the moment you sent me that picture." The way he said picture made her stomach twist. It wasn't just an image to him, it was something more, something that had pulled his interest in a way even he couldn't explain. "I don't even know you," she said, but her words lacked the conviction she wished they carried. "You will," came his calm reply. The air in her apartment felt suddenly thinner, colder. She stood up, pacing, her bare feet brushing against the worn wooden floor. "What do you want from me?" There was a pause, a deliberate one, and she could almost hear the faint sound of his breathing. Then came the answer that would turn her world upside down. "I'm sending a helicopter. You'll come to me tonight." Her hand went numb, the phone nearly slipping from her grasp. "You can't be serious," she whispered, disbelief coloring every syllable. "I don't joke, Elara," Lorenzo said smoothly, "especially not about what belongs to me." The words hit her like a slap. "I don't belong to you." Another chuckle, quieter this time, but darker. "You sent me your child, Elara. That makes you part of my world now, whether you like it or not." Tears pricked at her eyes, though she didn't even understand why. It wasn't just fear. It was something else, something magnetic that pulled her toward his voice despite the danger in it. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, trying to sound strong, though her voice trembled. "Don't make me come get you myself." The words dropped into the air like a command from fate itself, final and inescapable. The line went dead, leaving her in silence thick enough to choke on. Elara sank to the floor, the phone slipping from her hand. She could hear the rain starting again outside, the rhythm of it almost mocking. A helicopter? It sounded insane, ridiculous. And yet, something inside her whispered that he meant every word. For hours, she sat there, lost in thought, staring at the walls as though they might give her answers. Her mind was a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. Who was this man really, beneath the name that made even criminals whisper? Why her? Why the ultrasound? And most hauntingly, why did his voice sound like something she'd been waiting to hear all her life, even though it terrified her? Her phone buzzed again that afternoon. A new message lit up the screen. "Be ready at 7. That was all it said. No name, no signature, yet she knew it was him. She typed out a dozen replies, each one angrier than the last, but she never sent any of them, because every time her thumb hovered over send, that voice replayed in her head. the way he had said her name, the certainty behind it, the quiet promise of control. Outside, the city seemed to shift with the coming dusk. The wind grew stronger, carrying the smell of rain-soaked asphalt and something metallic. Elara closed her windows, locked the door twice, and yet nothing could quiet the storm inside. Eyed her chest. By the time night began to fall, she found herself standing near the window, staring up at the sky. The streetlights flickered. The world looked the same, but she didn't feel the same. Something unseen was already moving toward her. Then faintly, she heard it, the low rhythmic thump of blades cutting through the air, distant at first, but growing louder, closer. Her blood ran cold. It couldn't be real, but the sound kept coming. Her curtains trembled, loose papers fluttered across the room, and then the lights flickered once more before settling in an eerie stillness. She stepped back, her hand over her heart. The noise filled her world now, a heavy pulsing roar above the rain. She didn't want to believe it, yet when she dared to look outside, she saw it, dark and sleek, descending through the clouds like a shadow made of steel. Her breath hitched. The helicopter. A bright beam of light sliced through the darkness, sweeping across her building like a searchlight from another realm. For a moment it caught her face, freezing her in its glare. The phone buzzed again. One message. Step outside. Her heart slammed so hard she thought it might burst. She turned toward the door, trembling, every part of her screaming to run, but her feet refused to move. Another buzz. Don't make me ask twice. Thunder rolled across the sky, echoing the chaos in her chest. She swallowed hard, clutching the phone as if it could anchor her to reality. Then, with slow, hesitant steps, she moved toward the door. Every creak of the floor felt like a heartbeat, every breath a countdown. When she finally reached the handle, her reflection in the window caught her eye. Pale face, wide eyes, a storm behind them. She whispered to herself, "What are you doing, Elara?" But deep down, she already knew, because some voices weren't meant to be ignored, and his felt like the beginning of some thing she wouldn't be able to escape. The roar came before she saw it. At first, it was a distant hum that trembled through the air, almost blending with the rain. Then it grew louder, an unholy storm of sound tearing through the sky. Curtains fluttered, car alarms blared, and the wind pressed against her windows with restless fury. The city stirred in confusion. Neighbors stepped onto their balconies, umbrellas forgotten, faces lifted toward the sky as a dark silhouette descended from the clouds. The rain caught its blades, scattering droplets like shards of glass through the pale light of dawn. Elara's breath came in shallow bursts. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the door, her entire body trembling as the sound grew deafening. She had seen helicopters before, but never one like this. Sleek, black, and merciless, it wasn't a machine built for transport. It was a symbol of power, of ownership, of danger that had now arrived at her doorstep. When the pounding on her door came, it wasn't frantic. It was firm, deliberate, each knock echoing like the beat of inevitability. Elara flinched. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then, as if guided by something beyond her control, she reached for the handle. The door creaked open to reveal a man dressed in a black suit, his expression cold and unreadable. His presence filled the doorway like a shadow made of muscle and silence. "Miss Elara Hayes?" he asked, though his tone said he already knew. She nodded weakly, her heart lodged in her throat. "Mr. de Rossi is waiting," he said simply. No explanations, no questions, just a statement that carried more weight than a threat ever could. Elara looked past him, her eyes widening as she saw the helicopter hovering above the street. Its blades whipped the rain into a violent storm, sending newspapers and leaves swirling through the air. The neighbors stood watching from their balconies, faces pale, mouths open. She could feel their eyes on her, their murmurs cutting through the roar. To them, it must have looked like something out of a nightmare. A mafia boss sending a message, a keen of war for a single woman, for her, a woman who didn't belong in his world, a woman who had made a mistake. Her knees threatened to buckle. I can't, she whispered, clutching the edge of the door. The man's jaw tightened, but his voice remained eerily calm. You don't have a choice, ma'am. The way he said it carried no cruelty, just truth, cold and immovable. She felt her pulse racing, her breath shallow as she glanced back into her apartment. The soft glow of the ultrasound photo on her table caught her eye. It felt like a final goodbye to everything familiar. Her old life, the safety of anonymity, was slipping away. Slowly, she stepped out into the storm, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned even the roar of the blades above. As she approached, the wind from the rotors whipped through her hair, plastering it across her face. She could barely see through the rain. The man held out a steady hand, helping her climb aboard. The cabin smelled faintly of leather and smoke. The door slammed shut behind her, muting the world outside. For a long moment she sat frozen, clutching the seatbelt, her mind spinning. The sound of the engine vibrated through her bones. This isn't happening, she whispered to herself, but even as she said it, the helicopter lifted off the ground. The city below began to shrink, its lights flickering like dying stars. Through the glass, she watched the streets fade away, the broken sidewalks, the old corner store, the small apartment that had held all her struggles. Now it looked so small, almost insignificant. Her life, once defined by quiet survival, was vanishing beneath her. The rain clouds swallowed the world, and soon all that remained was the endless gray sky. The suited man across from her didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. You're part of something now. There's no going back. The flight felt endless. The rhythmic hum of the blades became a heartbeat above the clouds. Alara's mind raced with questions she couldn't voice. Where was he taking her? What would he do when she arrived? Would he be angry? Would he believe her when she said it was all a mistake? Every possible scenario played in her mind, and none ended well. Her fingers drifted unconsciously to her stomach. The baby kicked lightly, as if sensing her fear. She pressed her hand there, whispering, "It's going to be okay," even though she didn't believe it. Then, through the mist, she saw it. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, dark and wild beneath the storm clouds. And there, on the edge of the world, stood a mansion. It rose from the cliffs like a fortress carved from stone and sin, surrounded by towering iron gates and armed guards whose silhouettes watched the sky. The helicopter circled once before descending slowly toward a private helipad overlooking the waves. The blades sent ocean spray flying into the air as the machine touched down with a heavy thud. The door opened, and the wind rushed in. Alara hesitated, her eyes fixed on the mansion ahead. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back, but when the man gestured for her to step out, she found herself moving forward, each step sinking into the polished stone like the weight of her own fate. The air smelled of salt and danger. Somewhere deep inside, her heart whispered, "He's watching." 2 more guards flanked the entrance, their faces hidden beneath black coats. The massive double doors opened soundlessly as she approached. The inside was nothing like she imagined. It wasn't chaos or gold-plated luxury. It was quiet, cold, and impossibly vast. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hall like fragile secrets. And then she saw him. Lorenzo de Rossi stood at the far end of the room, back turned, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Even from a distance, his presence filled the air like smoke, dark, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. When he turned, the world seemed to pause. He was beautiful, but not in any gentle way. His features were sharp, sculpted from authority and danger. A faint scar cut across his jawline, giving him a quiet brutality that only added to his allure. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, the sound of the ocean outside faded into silence. Alara froze. Every story she had ever heard about him seemed to materialize in that gaze. The violence, the control, the cold precision of a man who could destroy lives with a single word. Yet beneath it all, there was something unexpected, something raw. His eyes lingered on her trembling hands, on the small curve of her stomach, and for a fleeting moment she saw it. Softness, pain, recognition. You made a mistake, he said finally, his voice low, smooth, and threaded with power. He took a step forward, the sound of his shoes echoing softly against the marble. But maybe... He paused, his gaze unwavering as it locked onto hers. Fate didn't. Alara's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain that she never meant for any of this to happen, but the words caught somewhere between fear and fascination. His nearness felt dangerous, like standing too close to fire. She could smell the faint trace of smoke and expensive cologne on his suit, could feel the gravity of his presence pull at her like a tide she couldn't resist. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The air between them felt electric, charged with something neither of them wanted to name. For the first time, Lorenzo looked away, just for a heartbeat, toward the ultrasound photo on the table beside him. She didn't know how he'd gotten it, but there it was, printed, framed, as though it had always belonged there. When he looked back at her, his expression had changed, softer, almost human. You shouldn't be afraid, he said, though his tone made it impossible not to be. If I wanted to hurt you, Alara, I would've done it already. His words didn't comfort her, they only tangled deeper into her mind. Fear and curiosity warred inside her until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. But as she stood there, under his gaze, something undeniable stirred in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known she was capable of anymore. Because for the first time, the man the city called a monster wasn't looking at her like prey. He was looking at her like she was something precious, something he didn't understand, something he might not let go of. And as the thunder rolled once more outside the windows, Alara realized the truth that made her knees weak. She was no longer a stranger in his world. She had just become its most dangerous secret. The silence in the mansion stretched like a living thing. The ocean roared somewhere beyond the glass walls, waves slamming against the cliffs in relentless rhythm. In the middle of the vast dining hall, a long table gleamed beneath the soft flicker of candlelight. Every flame seemed to shiver when she entered, as though even the fire feared him. Alara walked hesitantly, her reflection fractured across the polished marble floor. The scent of aged wine and sea salt filled the air. Her steps echoed, 1, 2, 3, until she reached the chair opposite him. Lorenzo sat at the head of the table, perfectly still. His suit jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up to reveal the veins that ran like rivers beneath his skin. The candlelight painted his face in gold and shadow, making him look like something carved from temptation and danger. A glass of red wine rested between his fingers, untouched. His eyes lifted slowly to meet hers, and for a moment, the world stopped moving. "Sit," he said quietly, his voice soft but carrying the weight of an order that could not be disobeyed. Alara obeyed. The chair creaked faintly under her trembling frame. A maid appeared from nowhere, silent as a ghost, setting down plates of food she couldn't even name. She wasn't hungry, she could barely breathe. Every sound, the soft clink of silver, the whisper of the wind, fell, but amplified. When the maid left, the room fell into a quiet so thick it could drown a person. "I didn't mean for any of this," Alara whispered finally. Her voice sounded small, fragile, like it might shatter under its own truth. "It was a mistake. I meant to send that message to my doctor. I never wanted to involve you." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, eyes steady on her. He said nothing at first, only swirled the wine in his glass. The liquid caught the light, dark and glimmering like blood. "And yet," he murmured, "you did." His tone wasn't accusing. It was contemplative, almost philosophical, like he was unraveling a puzzle that had haunted him for years. "You reached into my world with one wrong number, and for the first time in a long time..." He stopped. The faintest muscle in his jaw moved. "I didn't delete it." Alara swallowed hard. "Because you were curious?" His lips curved slightly, though it wasn't a smile. "Because I felt something I shouldn't have." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. She looked down at her plate, unable to meet his gaze. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I know fear," he replied, voice low. "I know truth when I hear it." And I know when something or someone was sent into my life for a reason. Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe it was just obsession, just control, but something in his tone made her heart falter. You think fate makes mistakes? She asked, half trying to keep him talking, half trying to understand him. Never, he said. Only people do. The way he looked at her then made her pulse trip over itself. There was power in his stillness, like a predator who didn't need to chase because the world came to him. He set the glass down gently and leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes burning through the distance between them. So, you're not carrying my child, he said at last, voice deceptively calm. Elarsh, froze. The way he said it, slowly, almost reverently, made it feel like a confession instead of a statement. Her mouth went dry. No, she whispered, shaking her head. It was a mistake. I'm sorry if I... But before she could finish, his gaze darkened. The muscles in his jaw tightened again, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes, something almost like pain. The silence stretched until it began to ache. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a breath. Then why does it bother me that you aren't? Her heart stopped. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes had dropped to the table, unfocused, as though he was fighting something inside himself. The candles danced, throwing shadows across the scar on his jaw. It made him look almost vulnerable. Ilara's lips parted, words forming and dying in her throat. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression told her it was a question he didn't want answered. Instead, she whispered, "Why would it bother you?" He laughed once, low, bitter, broken. "Because I've spent my whole life making sure nothing touches me," he said. "And now, one message from a stranger is enough to make me question everything I thought I was." Her pulse raced. She didn't know whether to be terrified or moved. There was no mask now, no mafia boss, no legend. Just a man who looked like he'd forgotten what it meant to feel human. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, buried under years of power and pain. It was the same kind of loneliness she carried, though hers came from poverty and his from the throne of empire. Two prisons, different walls, same emptiness. "Lorenzo," she said quietly, unsure if she was even allowed to speak his name. His eyes lifted to hers, sharp again, but not cruel. "You don't owe me answers," he said, leaning forward. "But you owe yourself honesty. Why didn't you block my number after that first message?" The question hit her like a strike. She hadn't expected it. She opened her mouth, searching for a lie, but found none. "I don't know," she whispered. "It's maybe because part of me didn't want it to end like that." He tilted his head, studying her. "End?" "It felt like something had started," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Even if I didn't understand it." Lorenzo exhaled, long and quiet. His gaze softened, barely, but enough to make her chest ache. "You should be careful with words like that," he murmured. "People have started wars over less." The moment stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. The flickering candlelight caught in his eyes, turning them almost gold. Ilara looked away, but it didn't matter. She could feel his gaze on her like heat against her skin. He rose suddenly, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor making her flinch. He didn't move toward her. Instead, he walked to the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the dark waves crashing against the cliffs. "I shouldn't have brought you here," he said quietly. "You don't belong in this kind of world." Ilara's heart twisted. "Then why did you?" He turned slowly. The look in his eyes was something between defiance and confession. "Because I wanted to see if fate would punish me for wanting something pure." Her breath caught. The words hung in the air like forbidden prayers. Lorenzo stepped closer, each movement deliberate, silent, predatory, but not threatening. The candles threw gold light across his face, and for the first time, she noticed the faint lines of exhaustion beneath his eyes. "I've taken lives, Ilara," he said quietly. "But tonight, you made me feel like I have one again." Her chest rose and fell rapidly. The air between them thickened. Every instinct told her to run, but her heart refused to move. "You don't even know me," she said again, almost pleading this time. Maybe that's why it's so dangerous, he replied, voice low, almost intimate. Then just as she began to drown in the weight of his words, he pulled away. The mask returned, sharp and unyielding. He straightened his cuffs, his tone turning firm once more. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. Alara blinked. "What?" His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "You're not safe outside. Not anymore. You've been seen with me. That makes you a target." Her stomach dropped. But he cut her off gently, stepping closer until his presence filled the space between them. "It's not a request," he murmured, and for the briefest moment, the edge in his voice softened. "It's a command, wrapped in something I don't want to name." The air stilled. The storm outside had quieted, but the one inside her chest raged on. And as he turned and walked toward the shadows of the hallway, his final words lingered in her mind, haunting, consuming, and utterly inescapable. "The mistake that brought you here might be the only thing that saves us both." The nights in the mansion had begun to stretch longer, heavier, like time itself had slowed to watch what was happening between them. The ocean's roar outside had become a constant heartbeat, syncing with hers, reminding Alara that no matter how far she was from her old life, she was still alive, trapped, but breathing. Days passed in a haze of uncertainty, her steps echoing through marble halls that seemed to breathe secrets. Every corner whispered of the man who ruled this empire of silence. Lorenzo de Rossi wasn't just dangerous, he was haunted. Sometimes she caught him staring at nothing, lost in thoughts so deep they seemed to drag him beneath their weight. Other times he disappeared for hours, only to return smelling faintly of gunpowder and rain. Yet every evening, without fail, she found him in the same place, on the balcony that faced the endless sea, where darkness met salt and wind. That night, the sky hung heavy with clouds, the kind that carried both thunder and truth. Alara stepped quietly into the cool air, the silk of her borrowed dress brushing against her skin. She didn't mean to intrude, but something in her heart pulled her toward him. Lorenzo stood there, motionless, a hand resting against the marble railing, a glass of whiskey glinting in the other. His shirt was unbuttoned at the throat, the night breeze tousling his hair. For a moment he didn't notice her. The light from the mansion spilled just enough to trace the outline of his face, strong, unreadable, and yet unbearably tired. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "She was pregnant," he said, not turning to face her. His tone wasn't meant for conversation, it was confession. "They killed her, and our child." The words struck her like cold rain. She froze, the breath caught in her throat. He wasn't talking to her, he was talking to the ghosts. "I tried to protect them," he continued, his jaw tightening, "but I was too late. They came for me that night, and when they couldn't reach me, they reached them." The sound of waves crashing below filled the silence that followed, heavy and cruel. Alara's heart ached as she stepped closer, unsure if she was allowed to bridge the distance between them. "Lorenzo," she whispered, his name barely leaving her lips. He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the reflection of pain burning in his eyes. "Do you know what it feels like to hold a future in your hands, only to watch it bleed out before you?" he asked, voice raw. "I swore that night that I'd never feel again, that no one would ever have the power to break me the way they did." His knuckles whitened around the glass. The mask of the Mafia boss cracked for a moment, revealing the man beneath, the one who bled, the one who once believed in love. Alara could barely speak. The lump in her throat felt immovable. "And now?" she asked softly, even though she feared the answer. He exhaled, a long, trembling breath that fogged in the cold night air. "Now you're here," he said, his voice breaking, "and I'm losing control all over again." Her twisted painfully. The storm she had seen in his eyes the first night was there again, only now she understood it. It wasn't just anger or danger. It was grief. It was love. He was too broken to admit he still needed. "I didn't mean to cause you pain," she said, her voice fragile. "I never wanted to. You didn't, he interrupted, turning fully toward her now. His gaze locked onto hers, sharp and desperate. You reminded me what it felt like to feel. I hate it. And yet, he took a slow step closer, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was feather-light, accidental, or maybe not. The warmth of his skin sent a shiver up her arm. The night seemed to hold its breath. Her pulse betrayed her, thundering so loudly she thought he might hear it. His thumb grazed her wrist just once before he let go, as though afraid his touch would destroy what little humanity he still had left. "Lorenzo," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. He looked down at her, and for a heartbeat, she saw it, the man he might have been before the blood and vengeance. "You should hate me," he said softly. "Every part of me is built to hurt the things I care about." "Then don't," she replied without thinking, surprising even herself. His jaw tensed, and a shadow crossed his face, one she couldn't name. "It's not that simple," he said. The sea wind howled between them, carrying the faint scent of rain. "In my world, caring is a weakness, and weakness gets people killed." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that love wasn't weakness, but the scars on his soul said otherwise. She could only whisper, "You're still human, Lorenzo. You just forgot what that means." He looked at her then, really looked, like she was something he'd never seen before. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, alive, fragile. And then, without warning, a sharp noise cut through the air. A faint click, almost too quiet to notice, but Lorenzo's entire body changed. His expression hardened, his shoulders straightened. The warmth vanished. He moved fast, pulling Alara behind him in one fluid motif. "Sal, stay here," he ordered, his tone back to the one that could make the world obey. "What is it?" she whispered, panic rising in her chest. He didn't answer. His eyes scanned the dark garden below, his hand slipping under his jacket where she knew a gun waited. The night that had felt so intimate a moment ago turned into something tense and dangerous. "Someone's here," he murmured. The air around them turned razor sharp. Alara clutched the edge of his sleeve without realizing it. He glanced at her briefly, his jaw clenched. Inside, now. But before she could move, the shadows shifted in the garden below. A figure stood among the hedges, still, silent, watching. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. The faintest breeze carried the metallic glint of a weapon. Whoever it was, they weren't there by accident. "Go," Lorenzo growled. She hesitated, fear paralyzing her. "Please." "Alara," he said, turning to her, his voice low but fierce. "You stay one more second, and I can't protect you." Something in his tone, the mixture of authority and desperation, snapped her out of her trance. She ran, but as she reached the doorway, she turned back for one last glance. Lorenzo stood at the edge of the balcony, the wind tearing through his shirt, eyes locked on the dark figure below. The man who had sworn to never feel again now stood ready to kill for her. Yet what neither of them realized, what the shadows already knew, was that the past he thought he buried had finally come looking for him. And this time, it wouldn't leave without blood. The storm outside raged like it had swallowed the sky whole. Lightning tore open the clouds, spilling white fire across the sea, and the wind screamed against the glass walls of the mansion. The air inside felt heavy, thick with tension, fear, and something far more dangerous. After what she had seen on the balcony, Alara couldn't sleep. Every sound made her heart jump. She wandered the hallways barefoot, her reflection flickering in the candlelit mirrors like a ghost haunting a place that wasn't hers. The house seemed alive, breathing with the weight of secrets it had witnessed. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, long and low, like a growl from the heavens. Then she heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, controlled. The kind of footsteps that made her pulse race before her mind even caught up. Lorenzo appeared at the end of the corridor, his shirt damp from rain, his hair tousled, his eyes burning with something she couldn't name. The weapon he'd been holding earlier was gone, but the danger wasn't. It clung to him like a second skin. He stopped when he saw her, small, trembling, caught in the dim light like a lost flame in the dark. "You shouldn't be out of your room," he said, his voice low but frayed at the edges, as though something inside him was unraveling. I couldn't sleep, she whispered. After what happened, her voice broke. I thought that I'd be gone, he finished for her. The way he said it made her heart twist. He took a step closer, his gaze softening for just a second. I told you, Ilara, he murmured. I don't run from danger. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Maybe you should. He gave a faint, humorless laugh, the sound rough and weary. If I did, I would have left a long time ago. The storm cracked again, bright light flashing across his face. That was when she saw it, the blood at the edge of his sleeve, smeared but not his own. Her breath hitched. You're hurt? She whispered. He shook his head. Not mine. The words were simple, but the look in his eyes told her everything. Someone had died tonight. Someone had come for him, and failed. She stepped closer, instinct overriding fear. Her trembling hands reached for his arm, but before she could touch him, he caught her wrist gently. Don't, he said softly, his voice dark with restraint. If you touch me right now, I don't know what I'll do. Her pulse throbbed beneath his fingers, but she didn't pull away. Then tell me to go, she whispered. Tell me to leave and I will. His jaw tightened, but no words came. Instead, he drew in a shaky breath, eyes flickering between her lips and her eyes, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff he knew he shouldn't jump from, but couldn't resist. I can't, he said finally, his voice breaking. And then, before she could say another word, he closed the distance between them. His hand slid to the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair as his lips found hers, fierce, desperate, aching with everything he'd tried to bury. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision of two broken souls, pain meeting need, fear colliding with want. She gasped against him, and he deepened it, his other hand gripping her waist, pulling her closer like he was afraid she might disappear. Every ounce of control he had built his empire on shattered in that moment. When he finally broke the kiss, his forehead rested against hers, their breaths tangling. I don't want to hurt you, Ilara, he whispered, voice raw, trembling in a way she'd never heard before. Then don't, she whispered back, her hand sliding up his chest until it rested over his heart. Don't let me go. He closed his eyes, and for a second, it felt like the world outside had vanished. There was no storm, no blood, no ghosts of the past, only the sound of two hearts trying to remember what it meant to beat for something other than survival. But then, light, a flash, not from the sky, but from the window behind them, headlights, blinding. The hum of an engine cut through the night. Lorenzo's body tensed instantly, the warmth of the moment vanishing like breath in winter. He turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Stay here, he ordered, the softness gone. Ilara froze, the sudden shift in his voice slicing through her. Who is it? She asked, but he was already moving toward the window, his movements sharp and predatory. Noah, Nay comes here uninvited, he muttered. The lights outside grew brighter, closer, painting the marble walls in streaks of white and shadow. Then the car stopped. Silence, the kind of silence that screamed louder than thunder. Lorenzo's hand went to his holster again, his fingers steady even as tension rippled through him. Lock your door, he said without looking back. Don't open it unless I come for you. Lorenzo. Do it, he snapped, then softened immediately. Please, Ilara. Do it. She hesitated, but the look in his eyes, half fear, half fury, made her obey. She turned and ran toward the end of the hall, her heartbeat drowning out the sound of the rain. Behind her, she heard the front doors open, the sound echoing through the mansion like a warning. A cold gust of wind swept through the corridor, making the candles flicker violently. Then came a voice, low, mocking, familiar. To him. You've gone soft, De Rossi, it said, echoing through the marble hall. Didn't think I'd find you hiding behind a woman. Ilara froze mid-step, her blood turning to ice. Lorenzo's voice answered, colder than she'd ever heard it. You should have stayed dead. The words hit like gunfire, and in that single exchange, Ilara realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a man from his past. This was the past, the one that had killed his family, the one that had come back for revenge. The storm outside roared again, wind howling through the open doors as thunder cracked above. And as she stood there, pressed against the wall, tears burning her eyes, she understood one thing. Whatever love had sparked between them tonight, it had just been marked for death. Because the devil Lorenzo had buried had finally come home. And this time, he wasn't leaving without taking everything Lorenzo had left, including her. The first gunshot split the night like lightning. Then another, and another. The sound of shattering glass ripped through the mansion, echoing off the marble walls like the voice of death itself. Elara screamed as the lights flickered and the world erupted into chaos. Men in black say sao. Ike stormed through the corridors, shouting orders in a language she didn't understand. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, thick and suffocating. She stumbled backward, her hand clutching her belly, searching for something solid, anything to hold on to. But before she could even breathe, Lorenzo was there, his arm wrapping around her, dragging her down behind the overturned table. His breath was ragged, his voice sharp and commanding. "Stay down," he barked, firing over the edge of the table. The deafening sound of bullets rang through the room, splintering wood and shattering chandeliers. Sparks danced in the air, flashes of muzzle fire lighting up his face in bursts, each one revealing the deadly calm in his eyes. Elara's heart hammered so hard it felt like her ribs would crack. The sight of him, the man who once ruled fear, now bleeding for her, it tore something inside her open. "Lorenzo," she cried, reaching for him, but he pushed her hand away, his jaw tight. "Don't move," he growled, reloading his gun with one swift motion, but she could see it now, blood spreading through the side of his shirt, dark and glistening under the broken lights. "You're hurt," she shouted. He fired again, his breath shaking. "It's nothing," he lied. "I've had worse." But the way he winced with every move told her otherwise. The storm outside crashed against the mansion walls, lightning flashing through the smoke-filled room. Every shot, every scream blurred together until it was impossible to tell where one ended and another began. Elara pressed herself closer to him, trembling as shards of glass rained down like falling stars. "Please," she whispered, "let's run." "There's nowhere to run," he said through gritted teeth. His eyes darted toward the hallway. "They came for me, but they'll kill you just to make a point." She felt her blood turn to ice. "Who are they?" "Ghosts," he muttered. "To the ones I didn't bury deep enough." He fired again, and the man in the doorway fell instantly, crashing to the floor. The echo of the gunshot seemed to linger long after. Smoke burned her lungs, the stench of gun oil and blood wrapping around her like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. And then, silence. For a moment, everything went still. Elara dared to lift her head, just enough to see the wreckage, bodies scattered, flames licking the edges of the curtains, rain pouring in through shattered windows. "Lorenzo," she whispered, but before he could answer, another shot cracked through the air. His body jerked forward and she screamed. He dropped his gun, collapsing against her. Blood soaked her hands instantly, hot and slick. "No!" she cried, catching him before he hit the floor. "No, no, no!" he gasped, his breathing uneven, pain twisting across his face. "You shouldn't have been part of this," he choked out, his hand gripping hers, tight enough to hurt. "I told you to stay away." Tears streamed down her face, her whole body shaking. "You didn't choose me, Lorenzo," she sobbed, pressing her hands against his wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. "Fate did. You said it yourself. Fate doesn't make mistakes." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a broken breath. "Fate has a cruel sense of humor," he rasped. "It gave me you, just when it decided to take everything else." His hand trembled as he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His skin was cold, his touch faint but lingering, as though memorizing her before the darkness could take him. "Don't say that," she whispered. "You're not going anywhere. Do you hear me?" "If I die," he said weakly, his eyes finding hers through the haze, "promise me you'll keep living." "Stop talking like that," she cried. You don't get to leave me now, not after everything. But his strength was fading fast. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint at first, then closer, like salvation and sorrow arriving together. He looked at her one last time, his gaze filled with something raw and unguarded. Elara? Her name left, his lips like a prayer, soft and fragile. You made me remember what it feels like to be human. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The storm outside howled, thunder rolling across the sea like the beating of a war drum. She pressed harder against his wound, her tears mixing with his blood. You're not dying here, she said fiercely. Not for me. Not because of them. He smiled faintly, the corner of his lips twitching. Then what do you want me to do? Fight, she whispered. Fight, Lorenzo. Another explosion rocked the mansion, flames licking through the doorway. She coughed, choking on the smoke, but refused to move from his side. They're breaching the south wall, a voice shouted outside. Lorenzo's eyes fluttered open again, just enough to find hers. Basement, he whispered. Behind the wine cellar. Go. Not without you, she said stubbornly. Elara? Don't waste your breath. She gripped his arm, helping him up despite his protests. Every step they took left a trail of blood behind. The smoke thickened, alarms blaring as the fire crept closer. He stumbled once, nearly falling, but she caught him, her hands trembling, her heart screaming. Almost there, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to him or herself. They reached the door to the cellar just as another shot rang out. The wall beside them exploded in sparks. Lorenzo turned, firing one last time with what little strength he had left. The man fell, but not before sending a final bullet into the darkness. Elara's scream pierced the chaos as Lorenzo staggered again, collapsing against the doorframe. No, 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 she cried, trying to pull him through the doorway. Stay with me. His hand found her face again, smearing blood across her cheek. You shouldn't have been here, he whispered again, weaker this time. You don't belong in this hell. She shook her head violently. Maybe I do. Maybe this is where I was always meant to be. To find you. The words broke something in him. A single tear slid down his cheek, a sight that hurt her more than any wound. Elara, his voice faltered. His voice, the sound barely a breath now. If I don't make it, you will, she interrupted, her voice fierce through the tears. You hear me? You will. But he only smiled faintly, his eyelids fluttering. If I don't, tell the world I wasn't always a monster. She pressed her forehead against his, sobbing. You were never one. The sirens were right outside now. Shouts filled the air. The flashing red and blue lights painted the smoke like a nightmare. Elara refused to let go, her arms wrapped around him as if her love alone could keep his heart beating. Stay with me, Lorenzo, she begged. Please. His breath shuddered once more. You made me wish I could. And then, silence. The fire roared louder, the world collapsing around them. But even as the smoke closed in, she refused to let go, because somewhere between pain and blood, something had bloomed, something defiant, unstoppable. Love, a love that refused to die, even when everything else was burning. And as she clung to him, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire, the sound of sirens drew closer, echoing like the heartbeat of fate itself. The story wasn't over, not yet, because even in the ashes, love still had one breath left to give. The world that once burned around them had gone still. Smoke had turned to silence, and silence had turned into the steady hum of machines. Somewhere far from the mansion's ruins, the sun rose over the horizon, washing the sky in soft gold. The sterile scent of antiseptic replaced the acrid smell of gunfire. The beeping of a heart monitor was now the only rhythm Elara trusted, the proof that he was still here, still alive. For weeks, she hadn't left the hospital room. She sat by his side, her hand always resting over his, afraid that if she let go, he might disappear back into the shadows he once came from. The nurses whispered about her, about the mysterious man in the private ward with the bullet scars and the woman who never slept. But Elara didn't care what they said. Her world had shrunk down to the slow rise and fall of his chest. Lorenzo had drifted in and out of consciousness, his body broken but not defeated. Sometimes she would catch him murmuring in his sleep, fragments of names, places, memories that belonged to a darker time. Sometimes he reached out, as if searching for someone lost long ago, and each time she held his hand tighter and whispered, "You're safe now. You're home." The rain came and went outside the hospital window, washing away the ashes of everything they had been through. The world moved on, but inside that small white room, time stood still. Days blurred into nights, nights into quiet mornings. The doctor said it was a miracle he survived. Alara knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was a promise he had made to her in the fire, to fight. And one morning, when she least expected it, the miracle she'd prayed for happened. His fingers twitched in her palm. The faintest movement, but enough to send her heart racing. She leaned forward, her tears falling before she could stop them. "Lorenzo?" she whispered, her voice trembling. His eyelids fluttered, heavy and slow, before opening to the dim morning light. For a long moment he didn't speak, just looked at her as if trying to remember if she was real. And then his lips parted, his voice hoarse, broken, but achingly human. "Elara." The sound of her name from his mouth was enough to undo her completely. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle the sob that escaped. "You came back," she whispered, her tears spilling freely now. He tried to smile, though it hurt him to move. "I never left," he said softly, his voice barely above a breath. "I just found my way back through the dark." She reached out, brushing the hair from his forehead, her fingers trembling. He caught her wrist weakly, his thumb brushing over her pulse. "You stayed," he murmured, "even when I told you to run." "I wasn't leaving you," she said, shaking her head. "Not when you needed someone, to believe that you were still more than what they made you." He looked at her then, not with the eyes of the ruthless man who once ruled fear, but with the quiet awe of someone who had finally found peace. "You should have hated me," he said. "Everyone else did." "I did," she admitted. "Once, before I knew who you were underneath the scars." He tried to laugh, but the sound turned into a cough. She leaned forward quickly, steadying him, her palm over his chest. The steady beat of his heart under her hand made her close her eyes for a moment, just to feel it, just to know it was real. When she opened them again, his gaze had shifted, not to her face, but lower, to where her hands now often rested, her stomach, rounder now, a quiet truth neither of them had spoken aloud until that moment. His breath caught, his trembling fingers reached out and brushed gently against her belly. "Elara?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes again, this time not from fear, but from something softer. "The doctors say it's been 3 months." He stared, disbelief and wonder mixing in his expression. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "This child, yours, mine, or fate's?" He stopped, his throat tightening. "Does it even matter?" She smiled through her tears, taking his hand and pressing it fully against her belly. "No," she whispered, "because whoever he is, he'll know love, not fear." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sunlight streamed through the window, painting them both in gold. Lorenzo closed his eyes, his hand still resting where new life grew, the one thing in his world untouched by blood or revenge. He opened his eyes again, looking at her with something fierce yet fragile. "Only if you promise," she said quietly, her voice trembling with hope and fear all at once. "Promise me you'll stay. Promise me you'll show him what love means, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that heals." He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his heart full. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, slowly, reverently. "I promise," he whispered. "No more running, no more hiding. I'll stay." Outside, the sound of helicopter blades filled the air, that familiar thunder that once signaled danger. But this time, it wasn't a threat. It was just a sound in the distance, harmless, fading. The same world that had once chased them now felt like it was finally letting them go. Elara leaned her head against his shoulder, careful not to hurt him. He turned his face slightly, resting his cheek against her hair. They stayed like that for a long while, listening to each other breathe. For the first time in years, Lorenzo felt peace settle in his chest. The ghosts of his past still whispered, the ones he couldn't save, the blood he couldn't wash away, but their voices were softer now, drowned out by the heartbeat beside him and the second one growing beneath her skin. As the sun began to set, the nurse peeked in and smiled quietly before leaving them alone. The room dimmed, painted in the soft orange of dusk. Elara lifted her eyes toward the window. "Do you see that?" she whispered. He followed her gaze. The first star had appeared above the horizon, faint but steady. "Yeah," he murmured. "Make a wish." She smiled faintly. "I don't need to. Mine already came true." He looked at her then, his eyes glistening, and for a moment, the man who once ruled the shadows looked like someone entirely new, someone reborn in her light. "Then I'll make one for us," he said quietly. "That no matter what happens, the world won't take this peace away." The night deepened around them, but the stars grew brighter, endless, patient witnesses to a story that began in chaos and ended in stillness. Elara closed her eyes, her hand resting over his heart. She felt thus, a steady rhythm beneath her palm, and smiled. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He turned his head, brushing his lips against her hair. "And I'll keep it every day until the stars forget to shine." Outside, the wind carried the faint hum of the sea, and far in the distance, a helicopter crossed the sky, not as a messenger of power or threat, but as a symbol of how one mistake, one message sent to the wrong man, had rewritten both their destinies. The man who had once ruled fear now ruled his own heart. The woman who had once lived in shadows had taught the devil what it meant to be loved like a man. And as the stars shimmered above them, the promise between them glowed brighter than any wound, stronger than any past. It wasn't the end of their story, just the beginning of a life built not on power or pain, but on the fragile, beautiful truth that love, even the kind born in darkness, can still find its way home. And in the soft quiet of that hospital room, as night embraced the city, two broken souls finally found peace, beneath a sky full of stars and a promise that would never fade.